Hi guys and welcome back to Is It Worth It reviews. Today we are talking about Musician Draco. It's the most affordable DAC coming from Musician, and they're known for making R2R DACs. And if you watch my channel regularly, you already probably know that I reviewed Musician Pegasus last year and I quite liked it. It had some great qualities, and Musician Draco here is even cheaper but shares most of those qualities. So I realize why so many of you asked in the comments to review this one too. So here we are. Now, if you look at the back of the unit, you'll see that basically nothing was deducted from Musician Pegasus. You still have these three usual ones, USB input, optical input and coaxial one, but also AES EBU and also I2S over HDMI port, which is usually the first thing to go with more affordable models down the line, but not in case of Draco, everything is here. As for the analog outputs, we still have balanced XLRs and single-ended RCAs. And then the front panel is basically the same. It's still this nice thick brushed aluminum, and the commands, buttons, these small red LEDs that signalize what are you doing with the DAC are all here. No LCD display, by the way. The only difference that you can spot just looking from the outside is that the unit, the rest of the unit is not also built from the thick aluminum like front panel, like Pegasus uses, but it has this bent metal sheet, but it's thinner. This is also okay in my opinion, like Denafrips Ares uses the same kind of build, and yeah, it's just fine. Now, I really don't want to talk about file support and tech specs of Musician Draco. You can find that on the official webpage. It's really easy. The one thing that I wanted to mention, because it's important for the sound, is that you have this NOS button, meaning that you can engage oversampling, OS, or disengage it, making this a non-oversampling DAC. And I have my fair share of dilemma with which is better, but in this case, I actually preferred non-oversampling. At least I think that is when you press that button and the LED above it lights red. If that's NOS, I preferred that mode because it sounded a little bit richer and more natural, and just tone timbre was richer. When this light is off, the sound becomes a little bit darker and closed in, and it lacks a little bit of fine detailing. I think that was OS. I'm saying I think because I haven't checked the manual. Manuals are for wusses. Real men don't read manual. They first tinker with their devices, and only if we do something stupid that we don't know how to fix, we read manuals. Now that out of the way, how does Musician Draco sound? For 750, it sounds mighty good. It has basically all of the qualities that I praised with Musician Pegasus. It's that very natural sound that R2Rs are known for, like the complete lack of sharpness and digital glare. But unlike some R2Rs, Draco and Pegasus, both of those, they resolve quite a bit of these fine details and like tiny stuff happening in the recording. And they can also sound very fast with rhythm and with transients, and just incisive like some R2R DACs cannot. And that was what I really liked when I reviewed Pegasus, that unfortunately I don't have with me anymore, but I'll try to make some sort of comparison using a third DAC that I compared both of these with, but that will come a little bit later in the video. So back to Draco, I'm talking about very resolving sound. It can hit nicely, it has dynamics, it has good rhythm and pacing, and it's resolving. It's resolving in the bass line. The bass line has great control, it has good slam. The mid-range is open and resolving. Inner tone texture is really good with this DAC. It's generally something that R2Rs convey better than DAC chips. And then high frequencies, are very well extended and open, and Musician Draco has that feeling like you are shining a strong light on the soundstage and on everything happening in the recording. Now, it being R2R means that never goes to digital sharpness or any sort of digital glare that people usually don't like with really resolving DACs that have lots of high frequencies. In this case, you feel like the music sounds bright and very extended and airy, but not sharp and glary. And it would be boring if I just continue to describe the sound with words without actually comparing Draco with some of the closest competitors. And for that, I chose two DACs. And these two DACs will be enough to assess the worth and the sound quality of Draco, because one is slightly cheaper, Topping E70 Velvet, which is one of my 2 or 3 favorite DACs up to $500 US. And that doesn't mean it's in a third or second place, but these 3 are equally good. I'm just using this one as the representative of the best sound you can possibly buy up to $500 US. So Topping E70 Velvet, when compared directly to Draco, sounds a little bit cleaner, like DAC chips usually do, but you remember that digital glare and sharpness that I mentioned? E70 Velvet has a little bit of that. You don't notice that listening to it on its own, but when compared to Draco, Draco definitely sounds a little bit softer and more natural, even though it's actually slightly brighter and probably a little bit more revealing in the highs. It definitely feels like sunshine is coming through the window and it shines on the soundstage. So you can see all of those small dusty particles in the air and you can just feel the air. Whereas E70 Velvet has great high frequency detailing and extension, but it feels like the air itself is a little bit cleaner and darker and tones are more isolated from that air. But they do feel a little bit more digitally sharp and actually not more revealing. You would say if it sounds cleaner, it's more revealing, but that's not the case. You hear all of the details, maybe even a touch more micro details and tiny things happening in the recording with Musician Draco, while at the same time being just a slightly softer and more natural sounding, but with a brighter tonality. Next difference that I've noticed is that Musician Draco sounds a little bit wider and airier in general. The soundstage is just a little bit deeper, so yeah, in general it is a little bit more spacious than E70 Velvet, which is no slouch in terms of sound staging and airiness and spaciousness by itself. Actually, it's the best DAC with that I've heard around $500 US. Other things like bass, speed and grip and extension, I felt they're quite similar. Mid-range detail retrieval and just how well connected and natural all frequencies in the spectrum sound, I felt these two are quite even, but that difference in how they present highs and tiny details in highs, with Pegasus being slightly more open and bright and airy, but at the same time more natural, that stands, and a little bit wider and deeper. So the difference is not huge by any means, but if I had to choose between these two, I would choose Draco personally. And the next comparison that I did was with slightly more expensive SMSL SU-10 at 900, I believe, 950, something like that. This is also a chip DAC, and it's so far my favorite sub 1000 DAC. There are some others that offer different set of qualities, but generally speaking, this is definitely one of the best if not the best DAC that I've personally heard below $1,000. And when I compare these two directly, the same thing about highs that I've talked when I compared Topping E70 Velvet with Musician Draco stands here too. So SMSL SU-10 feels somehow cleaner and like it has a darker background. And then tones coming from that background are crisper and they have cleaner edges. And then that sensation of air that's connecting all of those tones is not as present in SU-10. But there is a little bit more energy in like tone edges and just a little bit more of that digital sharpness. Draco definitely has that like sunshine shining on the soundstage. It has more of that high frequency air that makes everything in the soundstage feels connected in one whole more, but it definitely decreases the sensation of the background darkness. And I guess that preferring one or the other will boil down to personal preferences. When it comes to the mid-range, they're both probably equally resolving in terms of detailing, but SMSL SU-10 is slightly warmer in the mid-range. It has this slower mid-range and mid-bass a bit fuller, which makes vocals and instruments sound a little bit bolder and juicier and more engaging, more forward in between your speakers, maybe like more present in the room. Whereas Musician Draco is slightly colder, cooler sounding in the mid-range. But it still has that effortless smoothness and naturalness that like R2Rs usually have. And then the bass line, once again, it's a similar story, slightly warmer with SU-10, but really great, deep, well-controlled, impactful and engaging with both of these decks. Generally speaking, when it comes to that engagement and dynamics and energy, SU-10 is slightly more engaging and energetic sounding. It tends to grab for your attention just a little bit more than Musician Draco. And then the last part is soundstaging, and that's roughly equal. I feel that SU-10 is like a little bit more forward, equally wide, maybe even a touch wider when it comes to soundstaging. SU-10 is like exceptional chip DAC. It's the widest sounding chip DAC up to $1,000 that I've ever heard. But I do feel that Musician Draco has the same very slight advantage when it comes to soundstage depth. It feels like some tones that are coming from the back are slightly more laid back and slightly more behind your speakers. So I have to say this is a tough fight. And if you really prefer that soft, natural, effortless R2R sound that does not have any sort of digital glare or any hint of edges being sharp and coming from a digital source, then you might even prefer Musician Draco. Personally though, I have to give a slight advantage to SMSL SU-10 because I feel that it is slightly more engaging dynamically and it has juicier, fuller-bodied mid-range and vocals, and I personally prefer that just a touch to slightly cooler mid-range of the Musician Draco. That actually leads me to the last comparison that's not a direct comparison with Musician Pegasus. And I do remember when I compared SU-10 with Pegasus, because I had them both at the same time, that I concluded that they're equally capable and that Pegasus had slightly deeper and bigger, airier soundstage overall than SU-10. It was very close, but it felt slightly more spacious. Everything else I felt was pretty equal. And in this case, I once again feel that Draco and SU-10 are almost equal, but somehow I ended up preferring SU-10 for being slightly bolder and juicier sounding in the mid-range, whereas I do not really remember having that feeling with Pegasus, but memories are tricky. I would say that best case scenario for Musician Draco is that it's actually almost the same regarding sound with Pegasus, which is insane. The worst case scenario is that it has slightly narrower sound staging and slightly less airy sound staging, because I do remember that Pegasus did that a bit better than SU-10, just ever so slightly better. Whereas here, as I told you, SU-10 sounded slightly wider than Draco, but Draco was slightly deeper, and I think that that wasn't the case. SU-10 didn't sound slightly wider than Pegasus, and because of that, my conclusion that you should take with a grain of salt is that Pegasus sounds just ever so slightly wider and airier. Everything else, their tonality, their detail retrieval, dynamics and speed is comparable, which actually makes Draco a great value deck. Oh, one last thing that I know many of you would ask. I don't have it with me anymore, Denafrips Ares II, but I used that deck for longer than a year and I compared it directly to many other decks. So if you compared Ares II to Draco, Ares II would have wider and deeper sound stage. It's just bigger and more diffused. But Draco sounds speedier, it's more dynamic, it's more punchy, and it retrieves details better. Tones are also more focused and pinpointed with greater clarity, whereas Ares II is just softer all around, and it is dynamically compressed a little bit. If you prefer that huge sound staging and you like that soft sound, in terms of time domain, it's a little bit slower, not as fast-paced as Musician decks, then I get it if you like Ares II more. But in my mind, I think that both Pegasus and Draco are better sounding. And if you have to have both of these qualities in one deck, like huge sound staging and great detail retrieval and that nice natural R2R sound, you would basically have to go to Leather Schumann, that is both like huge with sound staging and as revealing, actually even more revealing than the Draco and Pegasus, but it costs basically twice the price of Draco, which again leads me to say that Draco is a great value. And I also arrived to that conclusion from another point of view, like comparing it to this Topping E70 Velvet and SMSL SU-10, which are both great values at their respective prices. I never heard anything better than Topping E70 Velvet at the same price. I never heard anything better, maybe just slightly different, than SU-10 at its price. And Draco being 750, like price-wise, just in between these two, is also sound-wise, sound quality-wise, in between these two, which means it maintains that exceptional value, that really high-quality sound for its price. And its biggest selling point, in my opinion, is that it is an R2R with all of the qualities that R2Rs bring to the sound. Nobody achieved that sort of smoothness and naturalness with chip-based DACs at the same price level. At this price point, at 750, if you want that natural sound that many people like and call it almost analog-like, close to turntables, and your budget is limited below $1,000 because most R2Rs are over that price point, then Musician Draco is actually a great one to think about. And that would be all for today, guys. I hope you liked this video, maybe you even learned something that you needed actually. And if you did, you know the drill. Like, comment, click, blah blah blah. See you next time. Bye.